Long ago, beneath mild starlight, an ancient ash whispered where leaves met silver water. Welcome to Sleeping Pill Tales, where the gentle whisper of Yggdrasil begins softly. Gentle light pools upon smooth bark, a soft breeze moves, clear springs flow in quiet measure. This calming myth story is designed to help listeners drift into sleep while listening. Amidst leaf shadow and tender moonlight, we walk soft-footed, and the world grows slower. Time loosens, breath steadies, and the great tree keeps watch in kind silence. And so we drift, leaf by leaf, along boughs bright with dew and starlight. And so we drift, ere dreams arrive, carried by low tones and patient words. Long ago, and ever now, we sit beside ancient waters and let thoughts settle. One can rest beneath these branches. The tale moves like water over stones. Before you drift off, please like and subscribe to Sleeping Pill Tales for more calming, relaxing bedtime stories. Settle into comfort and allow yourself to drift back to the ancient world of Norse cosmology. This tale unfolds slowly, like sap rising through the world tree's vast trunk. Let the words wash over you, carrying you toward peaceful rest beneath Yggdrasil's eternal branches. In a time before time was measured, in a space between spaces, there stood a tree. Not merely a tree of wood and leaf, but the tree of worlds, the axis of all existence. Its name was Yggdrasil, and its whisper was the first sound that ever was, and would be the last sound when all else fell into silence. Long ago, when the world was young and the mists of creation still lingered in the hollow places between realities, the ancient Norse peoples dreamed of this tree. They saw it in the patterns of frost on winter branches, in the reaching roots of ancient oaks, in the way sunlight filtered through summer leaves. And in their sagas and poems, they preserved the memory of this great ash, this world tree that holds all realms in its embrace. Let us journey to that place now, not with haste or purpose, but with the slow, inevitable movement of starlight across the night sky. Let us approach Yggdrasil as the ancient seers did, with wonder, with reverence, and with the quiet understanding that some mysteries are not to be solved, but to be experienced like a gentle breath in the darkness. The air here is cool and carries the scent of ancient forests, of damp earth, of clear water flowing from hidden springs. There is a stillness that is not empty, but full, a presence that watches without eyes, that listens without ears, that knows without thought. This is the presence of the tree, the great ash that has stood since before the first dawn and will remain when the last sunset fades into memory. As we approach, we feel not the hurried beating of our hearts, but the slow, deep rhythm of the cosmos itself. Each breath becomes synchronized with the gentle movement of leaves in a wind that blows between worlds. Each thought settles like dust motes in a sunbeam, drifting downward to find rest upon the moss-covered roots that delve deep into the mysteries of being. There is no need to strive here, no need to achieve or understand. There is only being, only existing in this moment that stretches into eternity. The great tree stands, and in its standing, it offers a lesson in stillness, in patience, in the deep, abiding peace that comes from knowing one's place in the great tapestry of existence. And so we begin our journey, not at the roots or the branches, but in the spaces between, in the quiet moments where the tree's whisper can be heard most clearly. We will move slowly, like the growth of rings within an ancient trunk, each layer containing seasons of experience, each year marked by the gentle passage of time. Close your eyes now, and imagine that you are standing before something too vast to comprehend, yet too intimate to ignore. Feel the presence of the tree as you might feel the presence of a sleeping loved one, a quiet assurance that all is well, that you are safe, that the universe holds you in its care. The light here is soft, filtered through countless leaves, each one containing a story, a memory, a possibility. The air moves gently, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, and something else, something ancient and wise and endlessly patient. This is the breath of Yggdrasil, the exhalation of the world tree, and as we breathe it in, we become part of its story, part of its eternal dream. And so our journey begins, not with a step, but with a breath, not with a thought, but with a feeling. The feeling of being held, of being part of something vast and beautiful and endlessly peaceful. The great ash awaits, and in its shadow, we find rest. The first thing one noticed about Yggdrasil was not its size, though it was immeasurably vast, but its presence. It stood at the center of all things, its roots delving into realms of ice and mist and darkness, its branches reaching into heavens of fire and light and music. And yet, for all its grandeur, there was a humility to the tree, a gentle acceptance of its role as the axis of the worlds. In these early moments of our journey, the light around the tree was the soft gold of an eternal morning. The sun had not yet climbed to its zenith, and the dew still clung to the leaves of the world tree, each droplet containing reflected worlds within its perfect sphere. The air was cool and carried the crispness of high mountains, though the tree itself stood in a place beyond geography, beyond the maps of mortals. According to the ancient verses of the Grimnismal, there were 3 roots that stretched from the great ash. One root went to the Aesir, the gods of Asgard, where the sacred well of Urdr bubbled with waters of fate and memory. Another root found its way to the frost giants in Jotunheim, where the well of Mimir held wisdom and understanding. The third root descended into Niflheim, the misty realm of cold and darkness, where the spring Hvergelmir seethed and surged, the source of all rivers. But in this moment of peace, before the troubles of gods and giants, before the serpent Nidhogg began gnawing at the roots in darkness, there was only the tree and its quiet existence. The roots were not yet burdened with the weight of prophecy or conflict. They simply were, delving deep into the rich, dark soil of possibility, drawing nourishment from the very essence of creation. The bark of Yggdrasil was textured like ancient stone, weathered by eons of cosmic winds, yet vibrant with life. Lichens of silver and soft gray clung to its surface, and mosses of deepest emerald carpeted the areas where roots met trunk. The texture was rough yet comforting, like the hand of an elder who has worked the land for generations. High above, the branches spread in a canopy so vast that it seemed to hold the very sky in its embrace. The leaves were of countless shades of green, from the pale silver green of new growth to the deep, almost black green of ancient foliage. When the wind moved through them, which it did in a constant, gentle sigh, the sound was like the breathing of the universe itself, a soft, rhythmic whisper that spoke of cycles and seasons and the patient turning of ages. Beneath this magnificent canopy, life flourished in peaceful abundance. 4 stags, Dane, Dvalin, Dunir, and Durathr, wandered slowly through the branches, their antlers like bare trees against the sky. They moved with a grace that seemed to defy time itself, browsing on the leaves of the tree without hurry, without greed. Their steps were measured, their chewing rhythmic, their presence a meditation on the simple act of being. The squirrel Ratatoskr was there too, though in these early days, his running up and down the trunk was not yet the carrying of insults between the eagle at the crown and the dragon at the roots. Instead, he moved with the simple joy of motion, his red fur a bright spot against the gray bark, his chattering a cheerful counterpoint to the tree's deep whisper. He was a messenger, yes, but in this time of peace, his messages were of the weather in the upper branches, of the quality of the nuts, of the simple news of a world at peace with itself. And in the highest branches, so high that they seemed to brush against the stars themselves, perched an eagle. Its eyes saw all that occurred in the 9 worlds. Yet in this moment, there was no judgment in its gaze, only observation. The beating of its wings, when it occasionally shifted position, caused the winds to move through the worlds, gentle breezes that carried the scent of pine and sea salt and distant rain. This was the world before conflict, before prophecy, before the great doom of Ragnarok was woven into being by the Norns at the foot of the tree. This was Yggdrasil in its prime, not yet suffering, not yet threatened, but simply being what it was meant to be, the center, the anchor, the great living connection between all that is, all that was, and all that would be. The light continued to change as we observed this piece, shifting from the gold of morning to the clear white light of midday. The sun, or what passed for the sun in this place beyond places, stood directly overhead, yet its light was filtered through the countless leaves of the tree, creating a dappled pattern on the ground below that shifted and moved like liquid gold. Beside the great route that led toward Asgard, there was a clearing where the light fell in gentle pools upon the soft moss. Here, one could sit and simply be in the presence of the tree. The moss was deep and resilient, like a green velvet cushion that had been growing for 1,000 years. It yielded gently under weight, releasing a scent of damp earth and ancient growth. Tiny flowers, no larger than a fingernail, dotted the moss with specks of white and pale blue, their faces turned upward to catch the filtered light. The air here was still, yet full of life. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams that found their way through the canopy, each one a tiny world floating in the vastness of space. The sound of the tree's whisper was clearer here, a soft sibilance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. High above, the leaves moved in a slow, rhythmic dance, each one turning slightly to catch the light, creating patterns that shifted and changed like the patterns of waves on a distant shore. Some leaves were as large as shields, others as small as coins, yet each was perfect in its form, each veined with lines that told stories of seasons come and gone. The bark of the root beside which we sat was textured like a map of unknown lands, with ridges and valleys, continents and oceans of gray-brown bark. Lichens grew in patches of silver and pale green, their edges soft and blurred like watercolor paintings. In the crevices, tiny insects went about their business, their lives brief yet meaningful in the great tapestry of existence. Time seemed to move differently in this clearing. The sunbeams shifted with infinite slowness. The dust motes danced in patterns that repeated across hours rather than seconds. The whisper of the leaves was a constant, gentle reminder that some things endure beyond the hurried pace of mortal concerns. And as we sat in this peaceful space, we felt our own breathing slow to match the rhythm of the tree. Each inhalation drew in the scent of ancient forests, of clean air, of life itself. Each exhalation released the tensions of being, the worries of tomorrow, the regrets of yesterday. There was only now, only this moment, only the peace of sitting in the presence of something eternal. Around the tree, the 9 worlds existed in harmonious balance. Asgard, the realm of the Aesir gods, shone like a city of gold in the upper branches, its towers catching the light in brilliant flashes. Yet the light was softened by distance, made gentle by the intervening layers of leaves and branches. The comings and goings of gods were like the movements of birds in a distant forest, present, but not disruptive to the peace of the tree. Midgard, the world of humanity, lay in the middle regions, its forests and mountains and seas spread out like an intricate tapestry. From this vantage point, the troubles of mortals seemed small and distant, their wars and loves and ambitions like the brief flowering of annual plants that bloom and fade in their season. Yet there was beauty in their striving, in their passion, in their endless capacity for hope. Jotunheim, the land of giants, stood as mountains of ice and stone, their peaks white against the blue of distant skies. The giants moved with the slow certainty of glaciers, their thoughts deep as fjords, their presence as ancient as the stones themselves. There was no conflict here, only the peaceful existence of beings who understood their place in the great order. Vanaheim, Alfheim, Svartalfheim, Nidavellir, the homes of the Vanir gods, the light elves, the dark elves, and the dwarves, each had their place in the great scheme, each connected to the others through the branches and roots of the tree. Like different instruments in a vast orchestra, they each contributed their unique tone to the harmony of the cosmos. Helheim, the realm of those who died of sickness or age, was not a place of punishment in these early days, but simply a place of rest, of quiet reflection, of peaceful existence beyond the struggles of life. The goddess Hel herself watched over this realm with a calm demeanor, her face both living and dead, representing the dual nature of all existence. And Niflheim, the misty realm of cold and ice, where the root found its way to the spring of Vergelmer. Even this place of primordial cold had its beauty. The ice formations caught the faint light in prismatic displays. The mists moved in gentle swirls. The cold was not biting but invigorating, like the clear air of a winter morning. This was the world as it was meant to be, balanced, harmonious, each realm existing in relation to the others, all connected through the great tree that stood at the center of all things. The gods went about their business, the elves sang their songs, the dwarves forged their metals, the giants contemplated their mountains, and humanity lived its brief, beautiful lives, all under the watchful presence of Yggdrasil. At the base of the tree, where the three great roots diverged, there was a place of particular power and peace. Here, the waters from the well of Urdr seeped into the earth, nourishing the root that led to Asgard. The water was clear and cold, with a quality of light that seemed to come from within itself. It moved slowly, without urgency, finding its way around stones and roots with the patience of eternity. The sound it made was barely a whisper, a soft gurgle that blended with the sighing of the leaves high above. Stones lined the stream bed, worn smooth by countless years of water flowing over them. Their colors were muted, grays, browns, soft greens, and their surfaces were cool to the touch. Moss grew thick on the north sides of the stones, a deeper green than the surrounding vegetation. Ferns clustered along the bank, their fronds unfolding in graceful spirals that seemed to echo the greater spirals of the galaxies that wheeled overhead in the night. Each frond was delicate, yet resilient, moving gently when touched by the breeze that always seemed to be present in this place. The air near the water was cooler, carrying the scent of wet stone and clean water and something else, something ancient and pure, like the memory of the first rain that ever fell on a newborn world. Breathing this air felt like drinking from a deep well of peace, each inhalation cleansing the spirit, each exhalation releasing what no longer served. Dragonflies hovered over the water, their wings catching the light in iridescent flashes of blue and green. They moved with sudden darts and pauses, their bodies slender and graceful, their eyes like tiny jewels observing a world that moved at a different pace than their own. Time flowed here like the water, slow, steady, inevitable. The minutes passed like the droplets of water that formed on the tips of fern fronds, gathering weight until they fell with a soft plink into the stream below, joining the greater flow that would eventually find its way to waters that nourished all the worlds. And as we sat by this stream, watching the water flow, listening to its gentle music, we felt our thoughts slowing, our concerns dissolving, our beings becoming as clear and peaceful as the water itself. The creatures of Yggdrasil went about their daily lives in rhythms that had been established since the first days of creation. The stags moved through the branches with a grace that seemed to defy gravity, their hooves finding purchase on bark that would have been slippery to any other creature. They browsed on leaves, their chewing rhythmic and peaceful, their eyes dark and deep with ancient knowledge. Ratatoskr the squirrel continued his journeys up and down the trunk, but in these early times, his purpose was not yet corrupted by the spreading of malice. He carried news of the weather, of the ripening of nuts in the upper branches, of the movement of clouds across the sky. His energy was boundless, yet it was a joyful energy, the expression of a creature perfectly suited to his role in the great scheme. The eagle in the highest branches preened its feathers, each one as large as a sailing ship, yet handled with the delicacy of a master craftsman. Its eyes, sharp enough to see a mouse moving in Midgard from this great height, observed all that occurred in the 9 worlds, yet there was no judgment in its gaze, only a profound acceptance of all that was. And at the roots, in Niflheim, the serpent Nidhogg had not yet begun its gnawing. It rested in the cool darkness, its coils wrapped around the root, its breathing slow and regular. In these early days, it was not yet the embodiment of corruption and decay, but simply another creature of the tree, playing its part in the balance of things. The Norns, Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, had their dwelling beside the well of Urdr, where they watered the root of the tree each day. Their movements were slow and deliberate, their faces serene, their hands gentle as they cared for the tree that sustained all existence. They wove the fates of gods and mortals alike, yet in this time of peace, their weaving was of patterns of harmony and balance. The day continued its slow progression, the light shifting from the white of midday to the gold of afternoon. The shadows lengthened, though in this place where the tree stood at the center of all things, the concept of east and west had little meaning. The light simply changed, as all things change, with the slow, inevitable movement of time. As afternoon deepened toward evening, a sense of contentment settled over the worlds. The activities of the day were winding down, the pace slowing, the light softening. In Asgard, the gods prepared for their evening feast. In Midgard, mortals lit their fires and gathered for the night. In Jotunheim, the giants settled into their contemplations. And in all the other realms, beings of all kinds turned their thoughts toward rest. And through it all, Yggdrasil stood, its leaves whispering in the evening breeze, its roots drinking deeply from the waters of the wells, its presence a constant reminder that at the center of all activity, there is stillness. At the heart of all change, there is permanence. In the midst of all sound, there is silence. This was the world before, a world of balance, of harmony, of peace. A world where each being knew its place, where each action was in alignment with the greater good, where the great tree stood strong and healthy at the center of all things. And as the light continued to fade, shifting from gold to orange to deep violet, we felt our own beings settling into this peace, this harmony, this deep and abiding sense that all was well and would be well throughout the long and star-filled night to come. As the twilight deepened around the world tree, a new quality emerged in the air, a sense of mystery, of depth, of possibilities unfolding like night-blooming flowers. The journey through Yggdrasil's realms began in earnest now, not as a quest with purpose or destination, but as a gentle meandering through the interconnected worlds that the tree sustained. The first part of the journey led downward, along the route that descended into the mists of Niflheim. This was not a descent into darkness as much as a journey into the depths, into the foundational aspects of existence. The air grew cooler, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and stone and ancient ice. The light faded from the violet of twilight to the deep blue of early night. Yet there was illumination from sources unseen, a soft glow from lichens on the bark, from fungi that clustered at the base of the root, from the very air itself which seemed to hold memory of light long after the sun had set. The texture of the root changed as well, becoming smoother, worn by time, and the constant flow of waters from the spring Yggdrasil. The bark was dark and rich, like soil after rain, and moisture beaded on its surface, catching what little light there was in tiny points of silver. The sound of water became more prominent, a distant rushing that grew gradually louder as the journey continued downward. According to the ancient texts, Yggdrasil was the source of all rivers, the wellspring from which all waters ultimately flowed. And as we approached it, we could feel its power, not as a violent force, but as a profound presence, a beginning that contained all endings within itself. The mist that rose from its waters was cool on the skin, like the touch of silk on a summer night, and the sound of its surging was a constant, rhythmic pulse that seemed to beat in time with the heart of the universe itself. Here, in the depths, the serpent Nidhogg rested, its coils wrapped around the root, its breathing slow and deep. In this time of peace, it was not yet the corrupting influence it would become, but simply a creature of the depths, its presence a necessary counterpoint to the eagle in the highest branches. Balance required both height and depth, both light and shadow, both the soaring aspiration of the eagle and the grounded reality of the serpent. The mist moved in gentle swirls, creating patterns that formed and dissolved like thoughts in a dream. The air was full of moisture, yet it was not uncomfortable. Instead, it felt cleansing, like a baptism into the primordial essence of being. The cold was not bitter, but invigorating, awakening senses that had been dormant, reminding us of the fundamental realities that underpin the more refined experiences of the upper worlds. At the edge of the great spring of Yggdrasil, there was a place to pause and observe the flow of waters from the source of all rivers. The water emerged from a deep cleft in the roots of the tree, bubbling up with a force that was powerful yet gentle, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. It was clear and cold, with a quality of purity that went beyond mere cleanliness. This was water in its essential form, before it had been shaped by stone or soil or the needs of living creatures. The sound of the spring was a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in the bones rather than being heard with the ears. It was the fundamental note upon which all other sounds were built, the baseline of existence against which the melody of life played out. Mist rose from where the water met the air, forming veils that shifted and moved in the subtle currents that always flowed through this underground space. The mist caught what light there was, glowing with a soft luminescence that seemed to come from within the water itself. Stones around the spring were worn smooth as glass, their surfaces dark and shining with moisture. They were arranged in patterns that seemed both random and intentional, as if placed by a hand that understood the deep grammar of the universe. The air here was heavy with moisture, yet easy to breathe. Each inhalation tasted of stone and depth and ancient mysteries. Each exhalation added to the mist that swirled around the spring, becoming part of the endless cycle of water rising and falling, forming and dissolving. Time seemed suspended here, at the source of all things. The water flowed, yet the spring remained constant. The mist formed and dissolved, yet the pattern remained. The sound rose and fell, yet the fundamental note never changed. And as we sat in this place of beginnings, we felt our own beginnings, our own essential nature, rising to meet us from the depths of memory. We were reminded that before we were individuals with names and stories, we were part of this great flow, this endless cycle, this eternal spring from which all life emerges. The journey continued, not downward now, but upward, following the route that led toward Asgard and the Well of Urdr. The way was gradual, winding around the great trunk of Yggdrasil, sometimes passing through regions where the bark formed natural steps, sometimes where the path was smooth and required little effort. The air grew gradually warmer, the light increased by subtle degrees, and the sounds changed from the deep hum of the spring to the more varied music of the middle realms. As we traveled, we passed through regions where the tree supported entire ecosystems in its bark and branches. Forests of moss grew in the crevices, their trees no higher than a hand's breadth, yet complete with their own cycles of growth and decay. Streams of dew flowed along leaf stems, forming tiny waterfalls that cascaded downward in slow motion, each droplet catching the light like a miniature world. Birds nested in the higher branches, their songs filtering downward through the layers of leaves. Their melodies were complex and beautiful, speaking of things beyond human understanding. The joy of flight, the comfort of nest, the mystery of egg, the simple pleasure of existing in the embrace of the great tree. The squirrel Ratatosker passed us several times, going up and down with his messages. His energy was infectious, yet it did not disturb the peace of the journey. Instead, it added a note of cheerful industry to the slow, deliberate pace of our ascent. He would pause occasionally, his head tilted, his eyes bright with curiosity, before continuing on his way with a flick of his bushy tail. The light continued to change, shifting from the deep blue of the depths to the soft gray of pre-dawn. The stars, visible through the gaps in the canopy, began to fade as a new day approached in the endless cycle of days and nights that turned around the great tree. After a time that could have been hours or days, for time moved differently in the presence of Yggdrasil, we reached the place where the root of Asgard met the trunk proper. Here, the Well of Urdr bubbled up from the roots, its waters clear and shining with a light that seemed to come from within. The Norns were here. Urdr, whose name means fate or that which has become, Verdandi, whose name means being or that which is becoming, and Skuld, whose name means necessity or that which should become. They moved around the well with slow, deliberate gestures, drawing water in vessels of polished stone, watering the root of the tree, tending to the well itself. Their faces were serene, their eyes deep with knowledge of past, present, and future. Yet there was no judgment in their gaze, only acceptance of all that was and would be. They wove the threads of fate on a loom that stood beside the well, their hands moving in patterns that were both complex and simple, both predetermined and freely chosen. The sound of the loom was a soft click-clack that blended with the whispering of the leaves and the bubbling of the well. It was a comforting sound, rhythmic and predictable, like the heartbeat of a sleeping child. The threads they wove were of many colors: gold for joy, silver for sorrow, bronze for courage, iron for determination, and many shades between representing the complex tapestry of existence. We paused here, watching the Norns at their work, understanding in some wordless way that our own stories were being woven into the greater tapestry, that our joys and sorrows, our courage and fears, were all part of the beautiful, complex pattern that was life itself. Beside the well of Urdur, there was a grove of trees that were not Yggdrasil, yet were connected to it through root and branch and shared existence. These were the trees of memory, each one containing the stories of beings who had lived and loved and passed beyond the veil of mortality. The leaves of these trees were of silver and gold, and when the wind moved through them, they gave off a sound like distant voices speaking of things long past. The stories were not clear. They were like dreams half remembered upon waking, filled with emotion and sensation rather than specific events. The bark of the memory trees was smooth and pale, like parchment that has been written upon and then erased, ready for new stories to be inscribed. Yet the old stories remained as faint traces, visible when the light struck at certain angles, like the ghost images that linger on the retina after looking at something bright. Beneath these trees, the ground was soft with fallen leaves that never decomposed, but simply accumulated layer upon layer, each leaf containing a moment, a feeling, a breath of existence that had been captured and preserved in this sacred grove. The air here was still and carried the scent of old paper and dried flowers, and something else, the ineffable aroma of time itself, which is like dust and sunlight and the space between heartbeats. When we walked through the grove, our feet made no sound on the carpet of leaves. Our passage was silent, respectful, as if moving through a library of souls, each volume containing a story that was both unique and universal. In the center of the grove, there was a clearing where a single tree stood, larger than the others, its branches spreading wide to shelter the space below. This was the tree of collective memory, where the stories of peoples and nations and civilizations were stored. Beneath this tree, one could sit and feel the flow of history, not as dates and battles and the rise and fall of empires, but as the accumulated experience of countless beings who had sought meaning, connection, love, and understanding in their brief moments of existence. The stories here were not told in words, but in sensations, the joy of a first love, the grief of a final parting, the satisfaction of work well done, the peace of acceptance at life's end. They washed over us like waves on a distant shore, each one different, yet part of the same ocean. And as we sat in this place of memories, we felt our own memories rising to meet us. Not the specific events of our lives, but the essence of our experiences, the emotional truth of our journeys, the patterns that had shaped us into who we were. There was no need to hold on to these memories, nor to push them away. They simply were, like leaves on a tree, present for a season before falling to make room for new growth. And in this acceptance, there was peace, the deep, abiding peace that comes from understanding that we are part of something larger than ourselves, that our stories matter, and that they are being woven into the great tapestry of existence by hands wiser than our own. The journey continued upward, into the branches now, where the realms of gods and elves existed in splendor that was softened by distance and the filtering effect of the leaves. The way was not steep, but winding, following the natural contours of the great branches that spread outward from the trunk. The bark here was different than below, smoother, lighter in color, with a texture that was almost silken to the touch. Lichens grew in patterns that resembled writing, as if the tree itself was inscribing stories upon its own skin. The air was clearer, with less moisture, and carried the scent of ozone and high places. As we climbed, the perspective began to change. We could see downward through the layers of branches, each one supporting its own world, its own reality. The view was not one of separation, but of connection, each realm distinct, yet linked to the others through the living structure of the tree. In the distance, through the leaves, we could see the shining halls of Asgard, where the Aesir gods dwelled. Odin's hall Valhalla stood with its roof of shields, yet the light that reflected from it was gentle, not harsh. The movements of the gods were like the movements of figures in a dream, deliberate, meaningful, yet without urgency. Further still, we could see Vanaheim, where the Vanir gods lived in harmony with nature, their presence like the changing of seasons, the flow of rivers, the growth of forests. The light here was greener, softer, more organic than the golden light of Asgard. Alfheim, the realm of the light elves, shone with a silver radiance that seemed to come from within every leaf, every blade of grass, every being that inhabited that space. The elves themselves were rarely visible, but their presence was felt in the music that seemed to emanate from the very air, a melody of such beauty that it brought tears to the eyes, yet was as natural as birdsong. We did not seek to enter these realms, but simply to observe them from our journey through the branches, to understand that they existed in harmony, each contributing its unique quality to the greater whole. The climb continued, the branches becoming smaller, the leaves denser. The air grew thinner, yet it was still easy to breathe, as if the tree itself provided what was needed for those who traveled with peaceful intent. After a time, we reached a place where the branches were slender enough to move in the wind, swaying gently with a motion that was rhythmic and soothing. From here, the view was breathtaking. We could see across the 9 worlds, each one distinct yet connected, each one beautiful in its own way, each one necessary to the balance of the whole. The eagle was nearby, though we did not approach too closely, respecting its solitude and its role as watcher of the worlds. It turned its head occasionally, its eyes missing nothing, yet its presence was not threatening, but protective, like a guardian who watches over sleeping children. The wind here was constant, yet gentle, carrying with it the sounds of all the worlds, the singing of elves, the forging of dwarves, the conversations of gods, the laughter and tears of humanity, the deep thoughts of giants, the silence of the dead in Helheim. Yet these sounds were blended into a symphony that was complex yet harmonious, like many instruments playing different parts of the same great composition. High in the branches of Yggdrasil, there was a place where several limbs came together to form a natural platform, wide and stable, yet swaying gently with the movement of the tree in the wind. From this platform, the view encompassed all the 9 worlds, spread out like a map of incredible complexity and beauty. The perspective was not one of looking down from a height, but of being at the center of a great wheel, with the realms arranged around the central axis of the tree. The light here was the soft gold of late afternoon, though time had little meaning in this place beyond places. The sun, or what passed for the sun, hung low in the sky, its rays slanting through the leaves and branches, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted and changed with the slow movement of the wind. The air was clear and cool, with a quality of purity that came from great height. Breathing this air felt like drinking from a spring of crystalline water, each inhalation cleansing the body and spirit, each exhalation releasing what was no longer needed. The sounds from the worlds below were faint here, like music heard from a great distance. They blended together into a soft hum that was the background against which the more immediate sounds of the tree could be heard. The whisper of leaves, the creak of branches moving against one another, the occasional call of a bird that nested in the upper regions. The leaves at this height were smaller, more delicate, their green touched with silver at the edges. They moved constantly in the wind, each one turning and shifting to catch the light, creating an effect like countless mirrors reflecting the sky. When one looked upward from this platform, the branches continued to rise, becoming gradually smaller until they were like fine lace against the sky. And beyond them, the stars were beginning to appear. First one, then another, then countless more, until the sky was filled with their gentle light. The stars here were different than those seen from Midgard. They were closer, brighter, and seemed to be arranged in patterns that told stories of their own, stories of creation and destruction, of love and loss, of journeys taken and homes returned to. As twilight deepened, the light from the stars grew stronger, illuminating the upper branches of the tree with a soft, silver radiance that seemed to come from all directions at once. The leaves caught this starlight, holding it briefly before letting it pass through to the worlds below. The movement of the platform was rhythmic, gentle, like being rocked in the arms of a loving parent. The swaying was barely perceptible, yet it was constant, a reminder that even this great tree was not rigid, but alive, responsive, moving in harmony with the cosmic winds that blew between the worlds. And as we sat on this platform, watching the stars emerge, feeling the gentle movement of the tree, listening to the soft sounds of leaves and wind and distant worlds, we felt a deep sense of peace settle over us. A peace that came from understanding our smallness in the great scheme of things, and our importance as part of that scheme. We were like leaves on the great tree, brief in our individual existence, yet part of something eternal. Our lives mattered, not because we were central to the story, but because we were part of the story, contributors to the great tapestry that was being woven through all time and space. And in this understanding, there was freedom. Freedom from the need to be important, freedom from the fear of being forgotten, freedom to simply be, here and now, in this moment that stretched into eternity. As night deepened around the world tree, the journey continued, not as upward movement now, but as horizontal travel through the branches that connected the various realms. The way was lit by starlight and by the gentle luminescence that seemed to emanate from the tree itself, a soft green glow that pulsed slowly, like the breathing of a sleeping giant. We traveled first toward Alfheim, the realm of the light elves. As we approached, the air grew warmer and carried with it the scent of blooming flowers and ripe fruit. The light here was silver rather than gold, and it seemed to come from within everything. The leaves, the branches, the very air shimmered with a gentle radiance. The elves themselves were rarely seen directly, but their presence was felt in the music that filled the air, a melody without beginning or end, complex yet soothing, like the patterns of waves on a shore or the movement of wind through grass. It was the music of growth, of beauty, of things coming into their perfect expression. We did not enter Alfheim proper, but traveled through its outer regions, where the branches of Yggdrasil were hung with silver lanterns that swayed gently in the breeze. The light from these lanterns was soft and diffuse, creating pools of illumination that guided the way without being harsh or demanding. From Alfheim, the journey led toward Midgard, the world of humanity. As we approached, the light changed from silver to the familiar gold of firelight and lanterns. The sounds changed too, the celestial music of Alfheim giving way to the more grounded sounds of human activity, the crackle of fires, the murmur of conversation, the singing of songs around hearths, the crying of babies, the laughter of children at play. We saw villages spread out below, their lights like golden flowers blooming in the darkness. We saw cities with their patterns of illumination, like intricate tapestries woven with threads of fire. We saw isolated farms where single lights burned in windows, beacons of hope in the vast darkness. The lives of humans seemed brief from this perspective, like the flickering of candles in the wind, yet each light was beautiful in its own way, each life a story worth telling, each moment precious in its transience. We felt a connection to these lights below, understanding that we too were once such lights, burning briefly in the darkness, contributing our small illumination to the greater whole. And there was comfort in this understanding, that our lives, however brief, were part of something eternal, that our light mattered, even if only for a moment. From Midgard, the journey continued to other realms, to Jotunheim with its mountains of ice that caught the starlight in brilliant flashes, to Svartalfheim, where the dark elves moved in shadows that were not threatening but protective, to Nidavellir, where the dwarves forged metals in underground fires that glowed like the heart of the earth. Each realm had its own quality, its own beauty, its own contribution to make to the great symphony of existence. And connecting them all was Yggdrasil, the great tree, its branches providing the pathways, its roots providing the foundation, its presence providing the context in which all these diverse realities could coexist in harmony. The night deepened, the stars wheeled slowly overhead, the tree whispered its eternal secret, and we continued our journey, not as travelers with a destination, but as witnesses to the beauty of a universe in perfect balance. In a quiet region between realms, where the branches of Yggdrasil formed a natural bower overlooking the void between worlds, there was a place to rest and observe the depth of the cosmos. The void was not empty, but full of potential, of possibility, of things not yet born and things that had passed beyond memory. It was dark, yet not black. Rather, it was the color of deep space, which is like velvet touched with the faintest hint of violet and blue. Stars hung in this void like jewels on a backdrop of the finest silk, their lights steady and calm, their patterns ancient and meaningful. Some were grouped in constellations that told stories of gods and heroes, of animals and objects, of events that had shaped the cosmos in its early days. Nebulae drifted in the depths, their colors subtle and shifting, rose and gold and pale green, like watercolor washes on damp paper. They were places where new stars were being born, where new worlds were taking shape, where the cycle of creation continued its endless turning. Comets moved slowly across the void, their tails streaming behind them like silver hair in water. Their movement was graceful, deliberate, as if they were dancers in a cosmic ballet too vast for mortal comprehension. The silence here was profound, yet it was not absence of sound, but presence of peace. It was a silence that could be felt on the skin, like the touch of cool silk, a silence that filled the ears and mind and spirit, washing away the noise of ordinary existence. From this vantage point, the 9 worlds seemed small and precious, like islands of light in a sea of darkness. Each world glowed with its own unique quality. Asgard with its golden radiance, Alfheim with its silver shimmer, Midgard with its warm, familiar glow, and the other realms with their own distinctive lights. Yet they were connected, these islands of existence, by the great tree that stood at the center of all things. Its branches reached out to each world, its roots anchored them in reality, its presence gave them meaning and context. Looking at this scene, one understood that the darkness between worlds was not something to be feared, but something to be appreciated, the necessary background against which the light of existence could be seen and valued. The void was the canvas upon which the masterpiece of creation was painted, the silence against which the music of the spheres could be heard. And as we sat in this place between realms, watching the slow dance of stars and worlds and comets, we felt our own smallness, and in that smallness, we found not insignificance, but belonging. We were part of this great beauty, witnesses to this magnificent display, participants in the endless dance of existence. The peace we felt was deep and abiding. The peace that comes from knowing that we are exactly where we are meant to be, doing exactly what we are meant to be doing, which is simply to be, to observe, to appreciate, to exist in this moment of endless now. The journey continued through the night, the path lit by starlight and the trees' own gentle luminescence. The pace was slow, meandering, without urgency or destination. The goal was not to arrive somewhere, but to experience the journey itself, the feeling of moving through the branches, the changing perspectives, the subtle shifts in air and light and sound. As we traveled, we encountered other beings who called the tree home. Owls with eyes like moons watched us from branches, their gaze wise and unblinking. Bats flitted through the spaces between leaves, their movements erratic yet graceful, their squeaks too high for human hearing, creating patterns in the air that were like invisible tapestries. Insects with wings of iridescent colors hovered around flowers that bloomed only at night, their petals white and fragrant, their centers glowing with a soft light that attracted pollinators from across the tree. The sound of their wings was a gentle hum that blended with the other night sounds to create a symphony of subtle vibrations. The squirrel Ratatosker passed us occasionally, moving more slowly now, as if the night had quieted even his boundless energy. He would pause sometimes to groom his fur in the moonlight, or to nibble on a nut stored in some hidden crevice, his movements economical and precise. The stags were bedded down in clearings where branches spread wide to form natural platforms. They chewed their cud slowly, their eyes half closed, their breathing regular and deep. They were at peace, comfortable in their place in the great tree, secure in the knowledge that they were protected by the tree's immense presence. The eagle had tucked its head under its wing, sleeping while still perched on its high branch. Even in sleep, it was majestic, its feathers ruffled slightly by the wind, its talons gripping the bark with unconscious strength. It dreamed eagle dreams of high places and far horizons, of winds that carried across empty spaces, of the slow turning of worlds beneath its watchful gaze. And all the while, the tree itself was awake, aware, breathing in the night air, drinking in the starlight, feeling the movement of worlds in its branches and roots. Its consciousness was not like human consciousness. It was slower, deeper, more patient, encompassing timescales that mortals could not comprehend. We felt this consciousness as we traveled, not as a presence that watched us, but as a presence that included us. We were within the tree's awareness, as were the stags, and the squirrel, and the eagle, and the owls, and the insects, and the worlds themselves. All were part of the tree's great being, all were cherished, all were necessary. The night deepened, reaching that point where it is neither late nor early, but simply night, the timeless heart of darkness from which all things emerge and to which all things return. The stars were at their brightest, the air at its stillest, the tree at its most peaceful. And we continued our journey, moving now toward the upper branches where the leaves were thinnest and the starlight brightest, toward that place where the tree reached its culmination, where the worlds below could be seen in their entirety, where the connection between all things was most apparent. As we reached the highest accessible branches of Yggdrasil, a transformation began to occur, not in the tree or the worlds around us, but in our perception of them. The boundaries between self and other, between observer and observed, between the journey and the traveler, began to soften and dissolve like mist in morning sunlight. The light here was pure starlight, undiluted by atmosphere or the filtering effect of leaves. It was cool and silver and seemed to come from all directions at once, illuminating without casting shadows, revealing without exposing, showing things as they truly were rather than as they appeared. The air was thin and clear, with a quality of purity that went beyond mere cleanliness. It was the essence of air, the fundamental substance from which all breaths are drawn. Breathing this air felt like drinking from the source of life itself, each inhalation filling not just the lungs, but the spirit as well. The sounds here were different too, not the specific sounds of creatures or worlds, but the fundamental vibration of existence itself, the hum that underlies all reality, the note that sounds when all other notes have faded away. It was a sound that was felt rather than heard, a vibration that resonated in the bones and blood and being. From this vantage point, the 9 worlds were spread out below like the petals of a great flower, each one unique, each one beautiful, each one connected to the others through the stem of the world tree. The perspective was not one of looking down from a height, but of being at the center of a great mandala, with the patterns of existence radiating outward in all directions. The understanding that came with this perspective was wordless, felt rather than thought. It was the understanding that separation is an illusion, that all things are connected, that the same life force flows through the eagle and the serpent, through the god and the mortal, through the star and the stone, through the tree and the traveler. This was the secret that Yggdrasil had been whispering all along, the secret of unity, of interdependence, of the fundamental oneness of all existence. The tree was not just the connector of worlds, it was the embodiment of connection itself, the living proof that diversity does not require separation, that individuality does not require isolation. As this understanding settled into our beings, we felt a profound peace, a deep acceptance, a letting go of the need to control, to understand, to achieve. We simply were, and in that simple being, we were part of everything, and everything was part of us. The night continued its slow progression, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, the tree breathed its slow, deep breath, and we remained in this state of unified awareness, not as individuals having an experience, but as the experience itself, as the awareness in which all things arise and pass away. In the highest branches of Yggdrasil, there was a place where several slender limbs came together to form a cradle, a natural resting place that seemed designed for contemplation and peace. The cradle was lined with leaves that were softer than silk, their surfaces cool and smooth, their color the pale green of new growth touched with silver at the edges. They yielded gently under weight, conforming to the shape of the body, providing support without pressure, comfort without confinement. From this cradle, the view was uninterrupted in all directions. Above, the stars hung like lanterns in the void, their patterns familiar yet endlessly fascinating. Below, the worlds glowed with their distinctive lights, connected by the great trunk and branches of the tree. Around, the void stretched into infinity, dark yet full, silent yet singing with the music of the spheres. The air here moved gently, a soft breeze that carried the scent of night-blooming flowers and clean water and something else, the ineffable aroma of space itself, which is like ozone and cold stone and the memory of light. The sound here was the sound of the tree's whisper, which was not a sound of words, but of meaning, of understanding, of acceptance. It was the sound that exists at the heart of silence, the vibration that underlies all existence, the note that is sounded when the universe breathes in and out. Time had no meaning here. The moments stretched into eternity, Yet each moment was complete in itself, perfect and whole, containing all that was needed for peace and understanding. The past was not gone, but present as memory. The future was not unknown, but present as potential. The present was not fleeting, but eternal, the endless now in which all things exist. In this cradle, one could let go of everything, of identity, of story, of purpose, of desire. There was no need to be anyone or anything. There was only being, only awareness, only the perfect peace of existence without complication. The stars moved overhead, their progress so slow as to be almost imperceptible. Yet they moved, as all things move, in the great dance of existence. Their light was constant, yet ever-changing, as new stars were born and old stars died in distant parts of the cosmos. The worlds below turned in their orbits, their lights shifting slightly as night progressed toward dawn in their various realms. In Asgard, the gods would be stirring from their rest. In Midgard, humans would be awakening to new days. In Jotunheim, the giants would be continuing their ancient contemplations. And in all the other realms, beings of all kinds would be going about their lives, each playing their part in the great tapestry. And through it all, Yggdrasil stood, its roots deep in the waters of memory and wisdom and primordial source, its branches widespread to embrace all the worlds, its leaves whispering the secret of unity to anyone who would listen. In the cradle of the highest branches, we listened. We listened with more than ears, with our whole beings, with the awareness that we were not separate from what we were hearing, that the listener and the heard were one, that the tree and the traveler were aspects of the same fundamental reality. And in this listening, there was peace, deep, abiding, eternal peace. As the night reached its deepest point, a subtle change began to occur in the quality of the awareness that permeated the highest branches of Yggdrasil. The sense of unity, of oneness, of boundaryless being, began to deepen and intensify, becoming not just an understanding, but a lived reality. The distinction between the traveler and the journey, between the observer and the observed, between the self and the tree, dissolved completely. There was only awareness, only being, only the eternal now in which all things existed as aspects of a single, unified whole. This was not a loss of identity, but an expansion of identity. The individual self was still present, but it was understood to be a temporary manifestation of the greater self that was the tree, the worlds, the stars, the void itself. Like a wave on the ocean, the individual was distinct yet not separate, unique yet not autonomous. From this perspective, the struggles and triumphs of mortal life were seen as patterns in the great tapestry, necessary and beautiful, yet not ultimately defining. The joys were appreciated more deeply because they were shared by all existence. The sorrows were borne more easily because they were held in the greater context of eternal being. The peace that came with this understanding was not the peace of absence of conflict, absence of pain, absence of challenge, but the peace of presence, the presence of a reality so vast, so beautiful, so complete that it could encompass all things without being threatened by any of them. This was the peace that Yggdrasil had embodied since the first days of creation, the peace that comes from knowing that all is well, and all will be well, not because bad things don't happen, but because everything, both joy and sorrow, is part of the great pattern, the great dance, the great story that is being woven through all time and space. As this peace settled into the awareness that was both ours and the trees, we felt a gentle releasing, a letting go, a surrendering to the flow of existence. There was no need to hold on, no need to control, no need to understand. There was only being, only flowing, only existing as part of the great whole. The stars continued their slow wheel, the tree continued its gentle breath, the worlds continued their turning, and we continued our existence as part of it all, not as separate entities, but as integral aspects of the unified reality that was, and is, and ever would be. As the unity deepened, there came a moment of perfect stillness, a point of balance between night and day, between breathing in and breathing out, between being and non-being. In this moment, all movement ceased. The leaves stopped their whispering. The wind paused in its journey. The stars stood still in their courses. The worlds halted in their turning. Even time itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something that was both ending and beginning. The silence was absolute, yet it was not empty. It was full of potential, of possibility, of everything that had ever been and everything that would ever be. It was the silence from which sound emerges, the stillness from which movement arises, the void from which form takes shape. In this silence, there was no separation between past, present, and future. All times existed simultaneously. All stories were being told at once. All possibilities were actualized in the eternal now. The first moment of creation and the last moment of dissolution were the same moment, the same breath, the same heartbeat of the cosmos. The light in this moment was not starlight or sunlight or any familiar kind of illumination. It was the light of awareness itself, pure and undifferentiated, illuminating nothing because everything was already luminous in its own being. There was no observer and no observed, only observation. No knower and no known, only knowing. No lover and no beloved, only love. This was the heart of Yggdrasil, the core of the world tree, the center around which all existence turned. It was not a place that could be found on any map, not a time that could be marked on any calendar. It was the eternal present, the timeless space, the reality that underlies all appearances. In this heart of the tree, all the myths and stories and legends of all the worlds were true, and yet they were just stories, just patterns in the great tapestry, just waves on the surface of the ocean of being. The eagle and the serpent were not enemies, but complementary aspects of the same reality. The gods and giants were not opposed, but necessary counterpoints in the great balance. Life and death were not separate, but two phases of the same cycle. Joy and sorrow were not opposites, but different flavors of the same experience. In this heart of the tree, there was no conflict, only dance. No struggle, only flow. No problem, only pattern. No question, only wonder. And then, as gently as it had come, the moment passed. The leaves began their whisper again. The wind resumed its journey. The stars continued their wheel. The worlds resumed their turning. Time breathed out, and the flow of existence continued. But something had changed. The awareness of unity remained, not as a dramatic revelation, but as a quiet understanding, a deep knowing that would remain even when the specific memory of this moment had faded. The peace remained, not as an absence of disturbance, but as a presence of acceptance, a capacity to embrace all that life would bring with equanimity and grace. The connection remained, not as a feeling of oneness with the tree, but as the understanding that we had never been separate, that the connection was original, fundamental, eternal. As the unity experience gently receded, leaving behind its indelible mark on our awareness, we began the gradual process of returning to a more ordinary state of consciousness. Yet the return was not a loss, but an integration. The insights and understandings gained in the heights were being woven into the fabric of our being, becoming part of who we were and how we would experience the world from now on. The descent from the highest branches was slow and gentle, each step taken with mindfulness and appreciation for the beauty of the tree at every level. The light began to change as we descended, the pure starlight of the heights giving way to the softer illumination of the middle branches, where the leaves began to filter the light again, creating patterns of shadow and illumination that were familiar and comforting. The sounds returned too. The whisper of leaves became distinct from the fundamental vibration of existence. The sounds of creatures going about their nightly business became audible again. The music of the spheres resolved back into the specific melodies of the various realms. Yet everything was different now, because we were different. The awareness of unity remained as a background hum, a constant reminder that separation is an illusion, that all things are connected, that the great tree holds everything in its embrace. As we descended further, we passed through the realm of the light elves again, and their music seemed richer, more meaningful, as if we could now hear the unity that it expressed. We passed through the regions near Midgard, and the lights of human habitation seemed more precious, more beautiful, because we understood their place in the great scheme. We passed by the Well of Urdr, where the Norns continued their weaving, and their patterns seemed clearer now, more comprehensible, as if we could see how each thread, no matter how dark or light, contributed to the beauty of the whole. We continued downward, past the route that led to Jotunheim, where the giants contemplated their mountains, and their thoughts seemed less alien, more understandable, as expressions of the same reality that expressed itself in other ways in other realms. And finally, we reached the base of the tree again, where the three great roots diverged into their respective realms. The light here was the soft gray of pre-dawn, the time when night is ending but day has not yet begun, the time of transition and possibility. The air was cool and carried the scent of damp earth and clean water and the approaching dawn. The sound of the waters from the well of Urdr was gentle and soothing, a constant reminder of the flow of time and fate and existence. We found a place to rest at the base of the tree, where the roots rose from the earth like great knees, forming natural seats from which to observe the coming of the new day. The moss was soft and resilient, the bark rough yet comforting, the presence of the tree strong and supportive. Here, we would wait for the dawn, not with impatience, but with acceptance, with appreciation for the beauty of this moment between night and day, between ending and beginning, between what was and what would be. As the first light of dawn touched the highest branches of Yggdrasil, turning them from silver to gold, a sense of completion settled over the journey. The night had been long and full of wonders, but now the day was returning, and with it, the cycle of existence continued its endless turning. The light gradually filtered down through the layers of leaves, illuminating the tree from above like a slow cascade of gold. Each leaf caught the light in its own way, some reflecting it brightly, others allowing it to pass through in emerald shades, still others holding it in the dewdrops that clung to their surfaces. The creatures of the tree began to stir. The stags rose from their beds and began to browse on the morning leaves. The squirrel Ratatoskr started his daily journeys with renewed energy. The eagle stretched its wings and prepared for its daily watch. The owls returned to their hollows, the bats to their crevices, the insects to their flowers. In the worlds around the tree, similar awakenings were occurring. In Asgard, the gods prepared for the new day. In Midgard, humans woke to their labors and joys. In all the realms, beings of all kinds began their daily routines, each playing their part in the great tapestry. Yet something had changed, though the change was subtle, almost imperceptible. The awareness of unity that had been gained in the heights of the tree had not been lost, but had been integrated into the fabric of existence. The tree itself seemed to stand a little straighter, its leaves to whisper a little more clearly, its presence to be a little more palpable. The peace that had been found in the heart of the tree was now present in every leaf, every branch, every root, every creature that called the tree home. It was a peace that did not deny the challenges of existence, but embraced them as part of the great pattern, the great dance, the great story. As the sun fully emerged above the horizon, flooding the tree with golden light, we felt a gentle pulling away, a gradual return to our ordinary awareness. Yet we knew that we were not truly leaving the tree, because the tree was not a place that could be left. It was a reality that could be remembered, a connection that could be renewed, a peace that could be accessed whenever we turned our attention inward and listened for the whisper that exists at the heart of all things. The journey was ending, but it was also beginning, because every ending contains a beginning, and every beginning contains an ending. The cycle turns, the wheel spins, the tree grows, and we with it. The last thing we heard as we departed was the whisper of the leaves, the same whisper that had been there at the beginning, the whisper that would be there at the end, the whisper that is the background music of existence, the sound of unity, of connection, of peace. And we knew, in that deepest knowing that comes not from thought but from being, that this whisper was always available to us, that the tree was always present in our hearts, that the connection was never broken, only forgotten. And so we returned to our ordinary lives, but we returned changed, carrying with us the memory of the tree, the awareness of unity, the peace that passes understanding. And whenever life became too hectic, too confusing, too challenging, we could close our eyes, breathe deeply, and remember the great ash that stands at the center of all things, its roots deep in the waters of memory and wisdom, its branches widespread to embrace all the worlds, its leaves whispering the eternal secret of peace. The sun rose higher, the day progressed, the activities of the worlds continued, and through it all, Yggdrasil stood, eternal and patient, the silent witness to the great drama of existence, the living connection between all that is, all that was, and all that will be. And its whisper continues, if we have ears to hear it. A whisper of unity, a whisper of connection, a whisper of peace. The gentle whisper of Yggdrasil, the world tree, the heart of existence, the home of all that is.